Hey everybody, thanks for joining the podcast. This is your friend Debbie Levitt from Delta CX, and welcome to all of you low ego action heroes. Please put a superhero in the chat. And today is episode 65. It's called Gaslighting and Being Set Up to Fail. We're going to talk about recognizing when these things are happening at our jobs. And I've got a very special guest today, one of your favorites based on what you guys are private messaging me. It's Dr. Seth Finkle. We'll have him on in a moment, but last time he was here, we promised that if he was coming back again, we would show you a photo of long time ago, and I mean long time ago, when the moon god and the sun god reigned supreme. Seth and I met in college. We met in 1989, and I think this picture is from 1991, and I want to share it with all of you. There you go. Once upon a time. I hope everybody will enjoy that crusty old thing there. And so time to bring Seth in and have him introduce himself and get cooking. Of course, we are live. If you have comments and questions, get them in the LinkedIn or the YouTube chat because I'm paying attention. And Seth is on his phone today. Fingers crossed for technology. Seth, how's life in Pennsylvania? Introduce yourself.
Hi, folks. Hi, Debbie. Great to be with you again. I am Dr. Seth Finkle. I'm a clinical and school psychologist living and working in the Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania and increasingly working in cyberspace. So, and things are good here. We're doing okay. It's a little hot and muggy, but otherwise life is good.
And you're safe?
Safe, yep. Generally, I mean, as safe as anyone is in 2020, which is to say, we're going to tell ourselves we're safe.
Safe for the moment. Okay, so
yep.
Thank you as always for coming back for these psychological topics and helping people deal with things at work. I got a lot of feedback on this already, and we haven't even done it. And so let's talk first a little bit about gaslighting. It's a word we see a lot nowadays in this year and in the last few years in the media. What would be, I guess, maybe a clinical definition or your definition of gaslighting?
Okay, so gaslighting is, for one thing, we should probably say where it comes from, because that seems like that's by law, you have to, when you use the term gaslighting, you got to actually give some credit to where it came from. So
okay,
back in 1938. A British playwright named Patrick Hamilton wrote a play called Angel Street in the U.S. or called Gaslight in Britain. And it was then turned into a film in England in 1940 and then a blockbuster Hollywood film in 1944 called Gaslight. Had Ingrid Bergman and Charles Boyer and a young Angela Lansbury in her first film role. And fun fact, Lansbury was actually nominated for the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress for her role in Gaslight, which was her screen debut. And she turns 95 this year, making Dame Lansbury the earliest surviving Academy Award nominee. So there's your Hollywood trivia for the day. So here's the thing. The thing of it is, the story of Gaslight has to do with a guy who was attempting to do some rather nefarious, not so good things and cover his tracks. And in doing so, he was trying to, let's say, mess with the head of his wife, trying to increasingly convince her that she was seeing and hearing things that weren't real. And essentially making her believe that she was going crazy. Gaslighting, in its most sort of vernacular sense, is just that. It's manipulating people, we could say emotionally or psychologically, abusing someone in a manner that attempts to try to make that person believe that they are not perceiving things that are real, makes them question their own memory or perception or judgment, makes them doubt themselves. So that's essentially what gaslighting is.
Okay, so it's that purposeful manipulation of someone, and of course this happens in personal relationships as well as at work, but that purposeful manipulation of someone who's trying to make you question yourself, question your reality, question maybe your own competence, because they are doing things to plant those seeds.
Exactly. And we should say, just to get this out there, I almost always say that it's purposeful or that it's intentional. It's conscious manipulation. It is possible for someone to manipulate someone without realizing that they're doing it. It's less common, but the fact of the matter is, it's important to note that the gaslighter still enjoys controlling the mind and behavior of the victim, that they're not just trying to influence or manipulate them, they're literally trying to control them in some way. So even if they don't know they're doing it, they're deriving a kind of pleasure from recognizing that they have this control over another.
Okay, and you and I have pre-written some role-playing to give people some examples of how this might manifest in work. We didn't rehearse these, so you and I are just going to have to put on our best acting chops. I'm a terrible actress. How about, I think of you as a great singer, but are you an actor?
I'm no Angela Lansbury, so I don't know. We'll do our best.
I don't know. I think you're very pretty. Okay, so let's see. So of the ones that we wrote, which one do you want to start with? The first one, where should we jump in on some good gaslighting examples? Because we're also going to be talking about setting other people up to fail, which I think they end up close cousins.
They do. Yeah, I mean, gaslighting in the workplace ends up looking very much like setting people up to fail. Gaslighting obviously can also be in personal relationships, it can be in politics, but the fact of the matter is, in the workplace, it often looks like setting someone up to fail. So yes, they're very similar.
All right,
we can take them in any order you want.
All right. So let's just start with the first one. And guys, please enjoy the theater that Seth and I have crafted just for you. And also, please remember, I'm going to have to, hold on, I have to put a disclaimer on the screen so that people don't think we actually say these things to each other. A disclaimer, this is theater. All right, let's try writing that on the screen. And let's slide that one in. Okay, here we go. So, here we go. Okay, so here's the first one. We're going to, I need like a clapboard for like, and scene.
And action.
Okay, here we go. I'm Debbie, and I don't like UX boot camps. I think they're not worth your time or money.
I'm in a boot camp, and I don't want Debbie to say bad things about boot camps. How do I shut her up? Debbie, you're rude and negative. You need to be more positive. Anybody who cares about people and their education would only say nice things about boot camps.
I'm not being negative or rude. They're just a waste. They're not likely to help you get a job, and there are much better ways to build your UX skill set.
I can't believe what a dismissive, uncooperative person you are, Debbie. There's no point listening to anything that you have to say.
Boing. Okay, and scene. So this is theater. Take that out. So tell us more about what do you feel was gaslighting about that, or is that just workplace bullying? How would we qualify that one?
Right. So I mean, and there is certainly a difference between workplace bullying. So bullying and narcissism are terms that we should probably also throw into the mix, because the fact of the matter is, bullying, frankly, most of the time is just sort of asserting yourself in a way that is trying to intimidate another person that they are perceiving as being more weak or more vulnerable. There's all kinds of traits that bullies have, but for the most part, they're a close cousin to narcissism. People who are narcissistic tend to be more exploitative. They tend to be more entitled. They have a lot of difficulty with empathy. Bullies tend to be a little more overtly sadistic. Again, there's that lack of empathy and narcissism. And they typically are often somewhat Machiavellian. They like to manipulate other people essentially for their own personal benefit. And I would say in this first role play, that's kind of what I see. Is there's a kind of pushiness about it, but it's consciously manipulative. Like, I'm literally thinking to myself, I don't want you to do this. I want you to do that.
How
and
do I
I'm literally
control
trying to
this
control you.
situation as fast as possible?
Right.
How do I put Debbie in a
Exactly.
box
Exactly.
real fast? Seth, I don't know if you can see this, but your face is evidently green, and the audience is reacting to
Oh.
this. Do you see
Oh
this?
dear. I do. It's interesting because when I move my little window that I see, I am not green, and yet on this screen I am green.
You're green,
That's fascinating.
and I know, I don't know what to do about that. It's like moving
Oh,
with you.
that's,
Oh, that got
move it over
better.
here so I'm less.
Okay, less
I'll actually.
green. Okay, let's try that. Sorry, fans. Yeah, so,
Green.
and then when we have a situation like that at work where we have someone who just wants to shut us down as soon as possible, make us feel small, put us in that box, what can we do other than recognize it's a game? I mean, are we supposed to run straight to HR, or what can we do in these situations?
Right. So, I mean, HR is a complicated one in that HR has essentially two major responsibilities. HR professionals, no matter where they are, have, and I'm married to one, so I had a conversation with her this very morning. There's both an ethical responsibility to the employees, but also to the company. And they need to try to balance those. And depending on the nature of that HR person and the culture of that company, HR may be a good ally to have, often can be, but they also, in some circumstances, may be more aligned with the company and less aligned with your particular
Covering
interests.
companies' butts.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's literally part of their responsibility. And there's a lot of pressure within a variety of companies for them to do that, even if they're not fully comfortable taking that role on. So HR absolutely can be helpful, but I would say, in addition to seeking out HR, one of the things you can do right up front is document the heck out of the other person's behavior. Which does two things. Number one, it provides you with any evidence if you need it down the road. If it does come to a situation where you bring in HR or an attorney or anyone else, you have something that you can show to substantiate your perception of things. And the other is you have something to show yourself, because one of the unfortunate realities of this kind of relationship, whether it's a personal relationship or whether it's a workplace relationship, it typically over time erodes your confidence and it starts to cause you to doubt yourself and your own memories, your own perceptions, your own feelings and thoughts. So to actually have some kind of documented evidence helps you to kind of keep yourself from engaging in that kind of self-doubt.
And Darren's here, and he says, it's sad that most HR operations demonstrate themselves to be completely untrustworthy. I only had good HR interactions when I worked in HR. Since then, a death trap.
Right. And unfortunately, that can be the case. So one of the things that I think is true as a psychologist is that it's all about relationships. And the person who is, or people who are responsible for human resources in any given company are just that. They're people. And if you have solid relationships with those people and there's a kind of trust that you can engage with them, then there's the possibility that you're going to be able to actually kind of use them as leverage if necessary. And there are certain instances where that can happen. I've worked in some settings where I've had that kind of relationship with HR professionals. But I also know, unfortunately, HR professionals are individuals who have a job, and that job is, and they receive a paycheck. That paycheck comes from the company. And so it really boils down to what's the company's culture? What are they trying to do? And is that company forward-thinking enough, courageous enough to actually take care of its employees? Or are they about protecting a couple of people at the top of that company, or because honestly, some of the people they're protecting are, we could call them high performers, we could call them closers, we could call them, they're people who are seen as having high value as an asset to that company. And so the company is designed to protect those high value assets. That's problematic for people who are trying to produce change and sometimes change the status quo of things that aren't healthy.
Now, before we go into our next role-playing theater moment, we have a question from friend of the show, Caroline, who asks, can gaslighting come in the form of over-complimenting a person and therefore trying to get them to stick around?
Absolutely. Great question. Yeah. So, and in fact, that's actually a pretty common component of gaslighting in general, because one thing we should probably say up front and just be really open and overt about this is that gaslighting is essentially a form of abuse. It's much more overt in interpersonal relationships, in dyadic or couple relationships where you can see it playing out. In that case, it's pretty obvious to most outsiders that it's an abusive relationship. It's harder to see when you're in a corporate or workplace environment. But in abusive relationships, gaslighting is a tactic that can certainly play out. And when it does, you get that kind of push-pull. There is a tendency to throw out all kinds of sort of compliments and positive reinforcement as a way of sort of confusing the other person, sometimes fake passion, or when you combine your own confidence and your own assertiveness with this kind of insincere compassion, you can easily start to get the other person to believe that they've got it all wrong, and they start to doubt themselves and their own perceptions and their own memories. So absolutely, it's a fairly common stratagem that can be used by the gaslighter.
Is that your clock? So let's go for role playing. If you're ready for our next scene, and again, I should put up the disclaimer because this one we went slightly political on, but we're imagining that this is a conversation happening at work and the conversation kind of gets political. So please remember, these are not things that I believe we wrote scenes. This is theater. So role-playing scene number 2 starts with me saying, people who loot and protest shouldn't be allowed to vote. Looting is un-American.
How dare that? Protesting is very American, and everybody deserves to vote.
Oh, well, what's wrong with you, Seth? Seriously, lighten up. Can't you take a joke? I'm just joking. And scene. So the typical thing that you hear from people is, when they get caught, they're just joking. You can't take a joke. How often have you heard you don't have a very good sense of humor?
Yep. Unfortunately, nowadays in the India world, we see this all the time. That's a super common thing. We get the idea that, you know, it's my perception is wrong, and that the other person was trying to say something, and that something, maybe I just misunderstood it. And it's really easy on social media to misunderstand someone's the subtleties of what someone's trying to say. So it's easy to see how this can be very effective as a kind of twisting around the reality of something. Something very, or in this case, you said something that was very clear. It didn't sound like you were joking at all. And then when I call you out on that, when I confront, you immediately respond, "No, it's a joke."
Right. Sorry. You should drink
Have I
bleach.
frozen up
Oh
on
wait,
your
I'm just
side?
kidding. You have frozen up. I know you're alive and you've got mobility, but you have frozen up. I believe in you. Meanwhile,
That is very weird.
while you are frozen, I'm going to take a moment to just break for a moment and remind people, since we don't have a sponsor, I instead am showing you this 10-second video about my company.
Delta CX, available for CX and UX consulting, projects, and training. Contact us for a free consultation.
Well, hello, I'm back. And here is where I also want to remind everybody, won't you please subscribe to the YouTube channel and ring that bell? And of course, press the like button if you enjoy these broadcasts, and please tell friends about it. This is something that I want to share, and it's something great you can do to support what I'm doing. You can also join our Slack workspace, which is completely free, and you've got access to me and lots of other friendly people. deltacx.link/join Slack. I'm going to see if I can bring Seth back in. He still looks frozen. Oh, he's less frozen. All right, let's see if we can bring him back and have actual motion. Marisol is here, and she says gaslighting can also come from a person that is not a high performer. In this particular case, the underperformer that gaslights used to work in HR in the company, so they have pull with HR. Oh, not good. Welcome back, Seth. Seth, can you hear me?
Oh, thank you. Hopefully it stays all kind of wonky today.
Yes, I think there's a bit of a delay, but we'll do our best with that.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, except we have a delay.
So yes, absolutely true. Oh, okay. Hang on.
Well, while we are waiting for Seth, don't forget that we are live. For those of you who are joining us in YouTube and LinkedIn, if you have any questions or comments, get them in the chat. I am monitoring the chat, and I will be happy to ask him your questions and read him your comments once he is moving again and hopefully less green. Also, a quick hello to some of the people joining today. Hello to Eugene and Monica. And who else do we have over in LinkedIn? Julia. Hello, Julia. I know we were just on Slack together. It's like I just saw you. So let's see. Seth, are you alive and can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. You're not moving very much, but I'll settle for lifelike audio at this point.
That sounds good. Okay.
Okay, great. Darren says, I've seen lots of folks who are experiencing imposter syndrome resort to gaslighting as a way of managing their state. Deep.
Absolutely. Yeah. So with both of the comments that I was able to hear, that is absolutely a concern. Is that people who are kind of desperately flailing around because they're doing well themselves may resort to this as a way of trying to kind of cover for themselves, and essentially make themselves look and feel better than they really are.
Got it. So let's try for our next theater moment. And hopefully we don't have too much of a delay and we can do some lifelike role playing. So again, disclaimer, this is theater. I'm not actually believe in this, and this is just a little scene that we wrote. So I'm going to start, and hopefully Seth will hear me and say his lines. So here we go. Seth, as your new manager, I'm telling HR to put you on a performance improvement plan.
Why? My previous manager did my annual review just a few months ago, and I got all perfect marks. Nothing's changed. What's going wrong?
You said something a few months ago, and someone found it insulting. This tells me you don't adhere to company values, so I've had to report you to HR.
Wait, I don't get it. No one ever told me that I said anything insulting at work. Why are you coming to me about this now? And a performance improvement plan? Is there something wrong with my performance?
As I said, your behavior sends a message that you don't hold the company's values.
Oh, okay. But what does that mean exactly?
I find your reaction very defensive and hostile. We've barely started working together with me as your new manager, and you're already giving me the impression that you're against me. This is just the sort of attitude that I'm talking about. Under the circumstances, I'd suggest you tread lightly, Seth, if you'd like to have a future with this company. And scene.
Scene. Oof.
Is anyone crying?
That's a rough one.
Vlad says,
we should
go ahead.
put out a trigger warning first.
I know, that's why I put disclaimer. This is theater, but I know it's real for many, many people. Vlad says, run away from that manager. And Darren says, great example, way too common. I know I'm telling a lot of people's stories right now with these scenes. And you have to remember that when you walk away from that conversation feeling like, what just happened here? Or you feel that blindsided, I always feel like that could be gaslighting when you are surprised that all of a sudden you're just not doing your job right.
Absolutely. I mean, certainly being set up to fail under those circumstances, and the fact that there's this kind of really insidious twisting going on there of what you're saying and kind of labeling. This one actually, I think, does a really nice job of illustrating a term that I only recently came across. And it's been around for a while now, since 1997, and it's the term DARVO. Have you ever heard of this one?
No, I shall Google while you talk.
It's an acronym. It's a good one. Jennifer Freyd in 1997 coined a few different terms, and they're great. And actually, I think they have a lot of potential impact for both psychology and also for workplace relationships and organizational stuff and social justice. DARVO stands for deny that the abuse happened, attack the victim for seeking accountability, and then lying, claiming that the abuser is actually the victim in the situation, so reversing the victim and offender. That's the RVO, reverse victim and offender.
Got it.
This is really, really common in abuse situations. And of course, what we're talking about is essentially an emotionally abusive situation. The two other terms that she put out, which I think are worth throwing out here as well, are institutional courage and institutional betrayal. Institutional courage, and there's a website that she has, institutionalcourage.org, talks about an institution's commitment to seek the truth and engage in moral action despite unpleasantness and risk and short-term cost. According to their site, it's a pledge to protect and care for those who depend on the institution. And it's a force that transforms institutions into more accountable, equitable, healthy workplaces for everyone. And not just workplaces, but all institutions. At least in the US today, in terms of discussions of law enforcement and politics and governance, and I think in lots of places around the world, this is pretty apropos stuff. And institutional betrayal would be sort of the opposite of this. It's the idea that people go from, trying to care for individuals and help create equity to generating a situation that's the opposite of that, essentially causing harm to those who are trying to just kind of survive within an institution or an organization that are supposed to be protected. And that includes a workplace environment. So in this one example, I think it brings out a lot of these concepts, the idea of denying, kind of reversing, being overly aggressive and attacking, and really kind of making it clear that this person is just being threatened by this manager, saying, if you don't watch your step, essentially, you're out of here.
Right.
That's an overt threat.
Got it. Yeah, absolutely. And if Lee is still here, institutional courage sounds like something Lee should be working into her universe, but that's just me talking to one specific person. So we've got another role playing that I want to do. And by the way, some of these were written based on things that actually happened to me. So if you feel like I told your story or I stole your story, some of these come from things that actually happened to me. So again, disclaimer, this is theater done by two terrible actors. But let's do the next role playing. And Seth, it starts with you.
Okay. Debbie, as your manager, I'm hearing that you're not creating the right documents for your project.
Okay. Nobody told me that. I'm not sure why they didn't come to me first. Which documents do you want me to make instead?
Well, here's a list of possible documents. Just go ahead and pick one of these.
No. You're setting me up to fail. If I'm not making the right documents now, then I've already guessed wrong. Please look at that list and tell me exactly what documents I should be making. And that's the end of that scene, because that manager never got back to me to tell me what documents I should be making. And I remember going home and saying to my boyfriend, I think I'm being set up to fail. And his response was, no, you love that job, and you like the people there, and you like the projects there. No. And Seth, I want to make sure that we talk about how people who love us and people who care about us and support us might not believe us or might not see this. And even where I was pretty sure I was being set up to fail, my boyfriend was, the guy at the time, not current super boyfriend, the nice guy I dated at the time, really thought it just couldn't be true. And I want to remind everybody that if you're dating someone who feels that way or married, push a little harder, because you might be right. Don't just assume, again, this is like accidental gaslighting. Don't assume it's you.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a great point. And the fact of the matter is, you can be, first of all, I will say, how much more does that force you to, or sort of encourage you to doubt yourself, right? When you're going to this person in your personal life, or your friends or your loved ones, and you trust them, and you're telling them about your experience of being set up to fail, and they respond by saying, no, that's not true, that's not real. I mean, that just pours gasoline on the gaslighting fire at that point. Even more insidious than that would be the instance where they attempt to undermine you by telling you or other people that you're crazy or irrational or unstable. They go directly to the other people and start to erode your reputation. They start to twist and reframe things in self-serving ways. So, for example, maybe saying, actually, if you remember correctly, I was actually trying to help you there, and I never said that. I said this subtly different thing, as I was actually trying to say this. So essentially, it's all about kind of going and putting out a different version of reality. I don't know if you were sort of, and if anybody else recalls this, but just a few years ago in our news cycle within the United States, there was the idea of having, the phrase was alternative facts, which is just a remarkable turn of phrase. And it speaks to this idea of different versions of reality, and in some cases, versions of reality that are designed intentionally to confuse and to kind of muddy the waters and to erode people's, to misdirect, exactly.
And propaganda. I mean, essentially, This is propaganda. We've got another great comment from Darren. Darren says, honest people are always willing to examine themselves when confronted with an attack or accusation. The gaslighters likely know this and use our humility to their advantage.
It's a great point. Yep. People who are more empathic, who are have more of a desire to help others, who are more honest, more compassionate, they tend to be the victims of gaslighting more than not. And then if you add to that a sense of being vulnerable or have already experienced gaslighting, the idea of this coming to someone who has already experienced some kind of abuse in a relationship, or maybe a pattern of abusive relationships over the course of their lives, they are a sitting duck for this kind of treatment. Because gaslighters fairly quickly pick up on the fact that, hey, my words and actions are affecting this person. I now have the remote control for this individual. And so they're more likely to continue that behavior. It's a positive reinforcement for the gaslighter at that point.
Yeah, I tend to recognize these things pretty decently, and I just find that people just blow up at me really fast. Like there isn't a slow burn. You know, they start with some sort of manipulation, but because I pick up on it fast, The situation usually explodes pretty quickly for me. I know that's not true for other people necessarily, because sometimes other people don't approach things the way I do. I'm a little bit of a no bullshit person, and so when I start seeing this stuff, I tend to go, oh, I mean, I did say to that manager, you're setting me up to fail. And I think I gave notice 6 weeks later because I saw other signs of it. So that's not going to work for everybody. You don't have to be like me, but I just find that instead of being like the long, abusive, slow burn, I find that when I start seeing the burning, I will talk to HR. I will say something to that person, and then it usually I should set off my fire effect. It usually explodes at that point. We've got a couple of great comments. Go ahead. We have a couple of comments. You first, Seth.
Okay. I was just going to say it's under those circumstances, that's a really good time, frankly, to get your parachute packed. Because in an organization, that's a pretty clear indication that things are it's going to come to a head. Something is going to give.
Exactly.
And if you're not feeling really confident that you're going to end up on top of that situation, and at that point, you may need HR on your side, you may need an attorney on your side, and you need to be prepared for the fact that you're going the long haul, and you have to ask yourself, is it really worth it? Because at that point, quite frankly, unfortunately, the easiest thing to do under the circumstances, and maybe the healthiest thing to do, is to walk away.
Right.
So if you don't have a tremendous investment in that client, in that company, in that job, in that partner, that might be the time to say, you know what, I don't think this is worth what I'm about to have to go through, and I'm still not guaranteed when I go through it that this is going to work out in my favor. Maybe I want to make sure my resume is good to go, and I want to be moving in a different direction right now.
Yeah, for sure. I do tell people it's always good to have that resume cleaned up, and that, for CX and UX, that portfolio, made more recent, because you never know when it's a good time to start looking. To address some of the comments we've been getting, Marisol says, gaslighters also try to influence the way other people perceive you. And Darren said, to Marisol's point, I once worked with a gaslighter who was threatened by my experience and operation. He would attack me every time I made a presentation, and went as far as planting false perceptions of me around our extended teams and with stakeholders. Even once spread that I was only hired to manage the maturity level and not do actual work. Who at our companies is going to help Darren?
Seriously,
where's
yikes.
HR? Yeah.
So, I have to say too, as an outsider to the UX world, but knowing a thing or two about consulting, and knowing that UX folks oftentimes are either consultants or are brought on in a kind of in-house consultant capacity of a sort, you guys are in a particularly rough spot. It's an awkward position to be in a consultancy in the first place, because you're given, in most cases, lots of responsibility and accountability, but not actually any real sense of authority. But then on top of that, your job is to promote change. Most of the time, you're not bringing in a crack UX person because you want to keep things the way they are. You're bringing them up because there's a desire, or at least thought of a desire, to make some change. And as you and I have talked about before, there's a lot of resistance to change, especially on the part of people who are really invested in the status quo. Some people are going to feel threatened direct by that change that you represent, and they're immediately going to start undermining you. And this is one way that can happen for sure, is by trying to turn others against you, trying to discredit you, trying to produce questions about your skill level or your expertise or your qualifications. That's unfortunately, that's a pretty standard procedure, and one that I have no doubt that folks listening to us have probably all experienced at one time or another.
Yeah, I find that when I've caught a few people, even just people I met on LinkedIn, doing some shady things, and I kind of went into a private message and wanted to start a conversation about some of the things I saw them doing, I find that people's go-to with me, and it's really strange, but it fits into what you're saying, is very often the next thing I will hear is, well, you only have a degree in music. And
Oh,
and
wow.
then they'll usually follow that up with, maybe you don't actually know anything about UX. Maybe you don't really do UX work. You only have a degree in music. And I go, I know when I see that. I know what that is. As soon as I see that, I know what that is. And that's just an attempt to try to discredit me, make me look smaller, make me look like someone nobody should listen to. And sometimes people say to me, oh, maybe that person did that because you're a woman. I don't even get tied up in, am I a woman? Is it ageism? Like, I don't even get too wrapped up in it. I just assume this is abusive, bullying, manipulative bullshit behavior. I want to read a couple of comments from the chat room. Lee said, alternative facts. That's code for lies. Caroline said, this is all even more difficult when you work at such a small company that you don't have HR and you have to become your own HR. Vlad over in the LinkedIn chat said, this is too real about consulting. Seth, you're moving again. I'm so proud of you.
I am. Oh, thank you. I try.
I'm so proud. Mommy, wow.
It's amazing when the bar is set this low. I can always satisfy people.
So this is what my audio podcast is like. The motionless Seth.
All I have to do is be able to move, and I'm suddenly a winner. This is great.
Everyone's favorite. Yeah. For that, we're going to set off the confetti. Yes.
Yay.
Seth is moving, people. Wishing us luck. Yeah, thank you. Wishing us luck that you don't turn green or freeze. We had something in our role-playing that fell into the bucket of, that's not what I said. And I think that's another standard approach to gaslighting is someone says something, you repeat it back to them, or you mildly paraphrase it and repeat it back to them, and suddenly, that's not what I said. So let's have a good fun and do that role playing. And of course, I should roll in my disclaimer. This is low quality theater, but worth what you paid.
Theater.
Right? No refunds allowed. Okay. So here we go. Role playing and go. Oh my God, I can't believe this hashtag is trending on Twitter. It's insulting. I am going to publicly tweet everybody I know at Twitter and ask them tough questions about why such a terrible hashtag is allowed to trend on Twitter.
Wait, you plan to try to publicly shame people at Twitter instead of communicating privately with the people you know who work there? Sounds like you're putting people on the spot just for the sake of being antagonistic.
Oh, no. Uncomfortable questions are, by their nature, seemingly antagonistic to those on the receiving end.
Well, this sounds like you want to blame other people for how they're taking your questions, but not look at your own behavior. You're saying that your questions seem antagonistic to the receiver if the question is uncomfortable to them?
No, I never said that. Looks like I need to block you. And scene. And for those of you following along who know me very well, let's just say that goes with my hashtag for unraveling, because that's the person who I had that Twitter fight with. I'll just say unraveling for that person. Darren says, I hate when people explain someone's take on something as perception is reality, but when you present your perception, it's poo-pooed away as not being worth considering, even though what you said included evidence.
Right. And therein lies one of the most important sort of strategies that I can suggest to someone. Again, the idea of document, because in the end, it's going to largely help you to maintain your own sanity. Because frankly, it may or may not actually help you with the situation. It's certainly not likely to change the person who's gaslighting you.
Right.
They're not going to go, oh, like the whole definition.
Oh, you
of
got
gaslighting
me.
is such that, oh, I see now. Right, because most of us human beings, gaslighting, as it turns out, we should also note, is not, although it seems everywhere, and as it turns out, it's a super common, just the term alone right now is kind of everywhere. It was, I actually noted that it was one of the most popular words of 2018, according to the Oxford English Dictionary. We might think of some political reasons why that happened at that particular moment. We can also say that if you do a quick Google search for gaslight or gaslighting, you bring up somewhere between 6 and 11 million hits for the term right now. It's kind of everywhere, and yet it's not super common. Manipulation, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, bullying, these are actually very common, ubiquitous, but gaslighting as a thing, as an attempt to try to manipulate someone's perception of reality, heretofore has been fairly uncommon. Although nowadays, I'm not so sure that's the case, because at least in the social media world, we see it all the time. And wonders how much of this is sort of a more common phenomenon in the social media world, vis-a-vis trolling and others who are trying to kind of twist reality. But the irony, it doesn't work. This whole, to come full circle to what we were talking about, the whole idea of "I never said that" fails when you're literally in print.
Yeah,
when
it was
the words
Twitter.
are screen, and you can look at it. It's literally right there. You can delete it, but the fact of the matter is, there's a record. You can look back and see these things. So it's a little bit disingenuous, to say the least, to say "I never said that" when you can literally see it's right there. You
Right,
said
there
that.
is no
But
video of
still
me saying that. No, wait, here's the video of you saying that.
Right. But videos can be altered. I mean,
Okay.
the idea is that it's all about never acknowledging what's happening. It's always about denying at all costs. And if you have to distort reality to make that denial work, so be it. That's
Yeah.
sort of at the heart of what this is all about.
And let's also mention, if you don't mind, that this really ties in with our previous podcast on narcissists. Everybody can go to the Delta CX YouTube channel, look in the playlist for live stream podcasts, go back in time, and you will find our podcast on narcissism. And having grown up with narcissists in my family, I remember one in particular, one of their favorite lines was, "Prove that I did that." So
Right.
if I say, "Hey, something you said bothered me or hurt me," that I would literally hear back from that person, "Prove I said that." I'm not following. I really started
Yep.
thinking about following that person around with a tape recorder. That tells you what year it is. And that was like, oh, wow. And my thought at the time was, oh, I'm set up to lose. I'm just set up to lose. There's no way I can win the "prove I said that" argument in the 70s without carrying around a tape recorder.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And nowadays it's the same idea, except instead of, because there are cameras everywhere and people are being recorded all the time and there is evidence all over the place, and people are still trying to manipulate the kind of the story, the narrative.
Right.
It's about who can control. The term they use, I guess, in communications is who's controlling the narrative, which speaks to a level of manipulation that's become so commonplace as to almost become ordinary or banal. And that's disturbing to me, quite frankly. We've come to recognize that everything is not only subjective, but it's up for grabs, and we can make it whatever we want it to be. That's problematic.
And Monica's posted something that I absolutely have to read because Monica has summed it up. Monica says, "This feels like the trifecta. UX people who are empathic and often vulnerable to abuse were put in the position of having to justify our existence constantly, and we're responsible for changing the organization, often single-handedly. We're often the only advocate for the customer in the room, with some or many people either against us or not understanding why we're there." How do you like that trifecta?
That's a great way of describing it. Yeah. So absolutely, I think the idea is that there's multiple layers or levels of struggle happening simultaneously in the UX world. There's the people who are resistant to change because everyone resists change. right? That's on the most benign level. There's always going to be. No, it's rare that you'll step into some place and people are happy to see you and all ready to make the changes that you're proposing. Change is hard, and so we know that that's automatically, in the best case scenario, it's going to be difficult. And as Monica points out, the personality of the person who's coming in is someone who's trying to be collaborative and trying to be compassionate and trying to take other people's feelings into account in an empathic way. And that does put them at a somewhat of a disadvantage when they're coming against resistance to some extent, because they may not be the most comfortable with confrontation. But then you add levels like overt hostile manipulation, undercutting and undermining, and just overt lying and deceit in an attempt to try to cover one's tracks. And in those situations, you're really in an impossible situation. Dr. Laura Helgo is a psychologist, and she wrote a book on narcissism called Fragile Bully. She said the only winning move is to not play the game.
Yeah.
She points out that really engaging only encourages the bully, who then responds to feeling threatened by just attacking more. And so in a lot of situations, you're really kind of, you're up against it to begin with, and then it's progressively worse when you dump into the mix someone with this kind of personality. It just pours gasoline on the fire.
Yeah, and we're getting a lot of comments in the chat room about, wow, this is what social media looks like. People are in their echo chambers. We had Lee said political issues have elevated the use of the term. A few people are saying they now have to go watch the movie. Caroline saying social media is exhausting. And Lee says life is too short, move on. And I think that's a point I wanted to cover, which is, once we can recognize this, and of course it's designed to be hard to recognize, that's the definition of it, but once we recognize the gaslighting and the being set up to fail, if we feel like we're at a workplace where our manager is not our friend, or maybe the manager is the enemy, HR is not our friend, or maybe HR is complicit in some way, I always recommend to everybody that you're going to have to move on. It's going to feel like defeat, or it's going to feel like surrender, and you're going to have to struggle with those issues as well of, I'm a change agent. Why couldn't I change this? Why couldn't I fix this? But sometimes we just have to walk away. And Lee says, companies who promote this type of behavior will not attract, let alone retain, top performers.
Right. One can only hope in the end that sort of economic Darwinism wins the day, and that these companies are going to have a hard time being able to survive. We know that that's not always the case, that unfortunately it's not a level playing field, that economies are not necessarily based on really sort of free markets. And so sometimes companies get propped up in ways that are unhealthy. That's a whole other topic. But absolutely, walking away is sometimes the thing. And even if you don't walk away, because sometimes it's very difficult to walk away, and there's ways to compartmentalize it. At minimum, don't let the bully or the antagonist take up space in your head. This is easier said than done, but essentially try to limit how much you think about, talk about. It's important to let some of this out to trusted loved ones, friends, people who kind of get you and get what's going on, and they believe what you have to say.
And I'm going to jump in quickly and say tomorrow's podcast is Dr. Ruth Diaz talking about resilience.
Nice. Good timing.
Yeah.
So boundaries, set healthy boundaries for yourself. Don't let these people take up residence in your own head. Because the fact of the matter is, if you have to remain in a workplace, if it's large enough that you can potentially work around some of these issues, and you feel comfortable and it's worth the investment of time and energy and just emotion to do so, feel free to do it. But I agree that there are going to be times where, and we've all probably been there, where you just have to say, I'm walking away from this. It's not worth my time and energy, because in the end, realistically, I don't have what it takes to be able to change this, because nobody does. And so at times, the only thing to, like in any other unhealthy relationship, is to walk away and protect yourself.
Yeah. Now we've got a question from Darren, and I think there's some tough components here, and I'm interested in what you would say to him. Darren said, "What do you do when you've been a serial victim of gaslighting, and it ends up making you look like you are a job hopper?"
Mm.
And of course, Lee says, "What's
tough.
the common denominator in that equation?" And so, is there something? I mean, I don't want to, I don't want to victim blame and say, "Oh, Darren, he's just some sort of gaslighting magnet." The reality is that Darren, who I know personally, is a highly intelligent person, highly capable person, probably the smartest guy in the room. So there's always going to be someone who wants to start chopping at the base of that tree. Is there something we could do differently that might make us less of a target for this?
It's a really good question.
Thanks.
I agree with you. It's a hard one to try to. Thank you, Darren. It's a hard one to try to address directly because there is something very sort of concrete about it. What do you do when? I mean, part of this is a kind of an employment personnel question as opposed to a psychological question. How do you get out from under a series of bad jobs, essentially? And to be honest, I don't know the answer to that. I will say that are there things we can do to help protect ourselves or to not fall into the trap of ending up in these situations? I think one of the things that I try to do right up front is I try to establish a sense of trust that I balance very much with really strong boundaries. I document everything. I save all interactions with everyone.
Agreed.
I keep them at my fingertips all the time. There's sort of the old adage of trust in God but lock your doors. Like you can give people trust, but by the same token, you need to protect yourself and you need to be careful because your professional reputation, your ability to get hired in the next job, does to some extent depend on how you did in the past positions and what they have to say about you, particularly when you work in this kind of a field. So I would say a little bit of explaining to do at the next interview. You have to be careful how you say it. You certainly don't want to jump into a job interview saying, "Yeah, my last 3 employers, were all gaslighting me." That certainly doesn't look great. Has bad optics to it. But I think you can talk about the fact that these were the things that I tried to do, and here's the resistance that I was met by, and the reactions that I had. Here's what I would like to see in a company that I'm going to be working with in terms of their response to what I'm going to bring them. I think it's the ability to be a little bit of a warrior or a winner rather than a victim of this, to go into it and say, I can bring you something. I can make positive change that's going to ultimately affect your company in transformative ways. I need something in return. I can't do it alone. I need you to work with me. And I've worked with several companies that struggled with that had a really hard time getting on board with what I was trying to bring them. I'm happy to talk with you about some of those experiences, but I'm also looking to hear what you have to say about how much you're really invested in change right now as a company. And I think it's being real, sort of putting them in a position of having to sell you on their willingness to really make change. You don't have to take every job that comes along. You can say no to who, honestly, you're not so sure they're not necessarily ready to make the kind of change that you want them to make.
Okay, we got some great comments coming in, and that was great as well. Someone named Foxy says, "I am currently preparing for walking away from such a job, but the situation has given me serious self-doubt in my skills and a fear it'll be worse at the next company. How do you deal with that?" Out of the frying pan.
Yeah, how do you deal with the fear of the unknown? Man, that's $1 million question, isn't it? I mean, the fact of the matter is, sure, it's possible that the next thing could look very much like this thing. So again, I think you go into it with the mindset of, I don't want that to be the case. So what am I looking for? what were the things that failed here? It's sort of doing a little bit of a post-mortem at the end of a bad job experience and recognizing where were the failures, where were the things that I possibly could have done things differently, and then what were the things that I frankly know objectively I did a good job. I did the very best that I could, and that was actually adequate, and in some cases better than satisfactory. It might have been excellent, but I was met with all kinds of resistance along the way. How can I address those those forces differently next time? And what am I looking for in a position, in a job? Even when the market is small and jobs are hard to come by, I still think it's important not to be desperate and to go into it saying, I'll take anything. Because if you do, you're going to end up in this situation more often than not. And it's going to be really difficult to find a better job after the fact.
And I think we have some comments in the room that will also help us. First of all, we have Monica saying, I'm not sure managers always understand how unrealistic their expectations are by asking UX people to do intense design work and be the best salesperson as well. The rockstar designer archetype has made this worse. And Lee said, I learned to interview the interviewers with hard questions to determine how they work, and then I interview people they work with. I do as much online research on future colleagues and managers. And Caroline agreed, saying, you can learn a lot by asking those hard questions in interviews. I have uncovered major red flags in how people answered or non-answered them. Caroline says it's important to understand how the people you interview with is asking you questions. I've been barraged by questions not relevant to my work that are inappropriate. So I think it's okay to have standards and not take every job that interviews you or gives you an offer.
Absolutely. And such great examples that interviews are really a two-way opportunity. And I think all too often, employers really failed to use that opportunity effectively. I'm not a fan of traditional interviews. I don't know that they necessarily tell you very much about what a person really is capable of, or what they're really like. We can all hold it together for 45 minutes to an hour, even twice, and turn out you're a person they were. But if you go into an interview in a kind of passive sense of my job in this situation is to try to sell them on who I am and try to answer all their questions, I mean, those things are important, but you also have a certain ability in the situation to ask things of them, find out more about them, do the hard questioning, do the probing, because ultimately the question that you need to ask yourself is getting a bad job better than not having a job at the moment? If the answer is yes, then take whatever you can get.
Right.
But ultimately, for most of us who are viewing this as a career rather than simply a job, then you need to be mindful of the fact that your career is going to be, to some extent, a reflection of, at least on paper, these different experiences that you've had. And so you need to be selective about them. You need to decide, in some cases, maybe this isn't really the best job for me. The questions they're asking me are wacky. I don't get the right vibe from this place. It just doesn't feel like a fit. That would be a really good time to walk away.
And I know we're over time. Thanks for staying a little bit long. That's how popular you are. So I want to tell the end of the story of one of the things we acted out had to do with me telling my manager I was being set up to fail. And about 6 weeks later, I had seen a few more signs that I was being set up to fail. And I realized that they weren't coming from my manager. They were actually coming from his manager. And so why this guy was threatened by me or whatever, story for another day, but turned out he was. And so I said to my manager, when does so-and-so want me out of here? And my manager said, how did you know? And I said, well, number one, you just confirmed it. And he's like, oh, oldest trick in the book. And I said, you just confirmed it. I said, but there's a whole list of things that were obvious to me. And I said, okay, if he wants me out and he's going to keep playing these games, I'll give notice today and I'll be gone in 2 weeks. He goes, oh my God, that my manager's been pressuring me to like fire you for the last week and I couldn't sleep because I have no reason to fire you. And I was like, that's okay, let's make all this go away and I'll just leave. And my manager was lovely and he handled it as best as he could. He was in over his head. And so I emailed HR and I said, hey, I'm leaving. How long is an exit interview normally here? And they wrote back and they said, oh, that's weird. We were just told to contact you to put you on a performance improvement plan. And I said, oh, that's so interesting. That's wonderful. They said an exit interview is normally a half hour. I said, fantastic. Let's book 2 hours. And they said, really? And I said, oh, yeah. I said, I have a lot of emails you need to see. I said, we can share screens, right? Yes. I said, great. So I said, I have a number of emails you're going to need to see. And we talked for 2 hours. And also in that time, I had also privately spoken to a number of other people in the department who had already quit and moved on to other jobs. And they felt comfortable telling me a little bit of the truth of why they left. And everybody left because of the manager's manager. And so I went to HR and I just said, here's my 2 hours of what happened to me and how I'm being pushed out by this guy and his henchmen. And I'm under the impression I'm the 8th person to be leaving because of this in the last year. How much longer are you going to let this go on? And she said, I can't betray anybody's confidence, but I will say your story sounds extremely familiar. And both of those guys were gone within 5 months. And I was already gone, and so were 8 wonderful people. But so I think we have to remember that we may make a change. Those of us who love making change, we may make a change and leave that behind us. But I would probably go to HR and say these things because I always hope to leave a place better than I found it.
Absolutely. So, I mean, the fact of the matter is we know that there are some employees in every company that are problematic, that have difficult personalities, that don't really apply themselves very effectively, that try to kind of skirt the rules. We know that these people exist in every company. We know that part of HR's responsibility is to try to identify these people and to try to either help them to improve or to help them find their way out, to sever their relationship with the company.
Right.
The fact of the matter is, the person who is the gaslighter may well be one of those people who's already sort of been identified. Or maybe you're starting something that then essentially puts you in the position of being a whistleblower, the person who's saying, hey, this thing is happening, and then it makes it okay for other people to come out and say, hey, these are things that have happened to me. It's sort of the Me Too scenario. And I think your example is a really optimistic and positive one, because it does say part of making change is doing the hard stuff. And sometimes that requires major personal sacrifice. That's why UX is so important. It's one of many reasons, because these are folks who are advocates. They are champions of trying to make transformative, positive change. And sometimes the only way to do that is to essentially create a crisis. If things are sort of stuck in a position of someone being a horrible manager and engaging in terrible behavior towards other people and getting away with it time after time after time, and it's ultimately producing very low retention quality staff for that organization, of course HR should do something about that. Will they? I mean, in your case, it sounds like they did, which is great. They won't always. And they certainly won't always tell you, they can't always tell you or confirm for you, oh yes, I've been told this many times about this person. We know that. But it doesn't mean they're not paying attention. And it doesn't mean that they're not necessarily trying to do something about that. And sometimes that'll happen. So in your case, I'm really glad that that's the way it ended up. I'm sad that you and 8 other good people had to leave in the process.
I was sad too. I actually had to do less than 2 weeks notice because I was going to work and crying all day because people were coming up to my desk going, "We heard you're leaving. You can't leave. We love you. You're doing great work." And meanwhile, they had no idea that behind the scenes I was being forced out because of these conflicts. And finally, I wrote to HR and I said, "I can't come into the office anymore. I'm just crying all day. And this is ridiculous." So I think we have to remember, and sorry we're running late thanks to people sticking with us, we have to remember that HR only has the information that's been brought to them. And when your aggressor, your gaslighter, your manipulative manager has been starting to feed HR information, like I was going to be put on a performance improvement plan. So clearly my boss's boss had been feeding HR information and filing paperwork saying Debbie's not a good worker. So I do believe that unless you know HR will absolutely never be on your side. I tell people when you start recognizing these things, get ahead of it, always document everything, and start getting these things to HR more proactively. Find someone there who can be your representative. And as things are going on, say, "Hey, Jim, Sally, whoever it is, something strange is happening again. I need to forward you an email. Please don't do anything about this. Just hold on to it for now, and let's see what happens." And I've done that as well. I had a situation where I could see someone was setting me up to get fired, and I just started sending people a whole bunch of emails and correspondence, and I said, in case this goes somewhere, you need to see what's happening behind the scenes.
It's great advice. I've actually had that happen in multiple positions, and each time documentation is a big part of my job to begin with, so it's been my friend, and I tend to, as I say, take detailed, copious notes and save them more or less forever, certainly longer than I need to. And that's precisely why, because you just never know when something's going to come back to bite you. So, the more you can set alliances, the more you can kind of share the flow of information as it's coming to you, the more likely that you'll be able to kind of come out the other side of it in one piece. The worst case scenario, in most cases, is that it becomes very clear that this was not a place that you were going to be thrive. And then under those circumstances, I would say, rather than feel like you've not been successful in producing change, I think the thing to do is to applaud yourself for being able to actually take care of yourself under those circumstances and recognize when it's time to walk away.
Yeah, it's an important one. So I'm sorry we've run so late. We should wrap up. And don't forget, our guest has been the fantastic Seth Finkle.
Who once had hair.
Well, I used to be 30 pounds lighter. Let's not go there. So thanks to everybody who joined and especially stuck out the long haul with us, stuck out Seth's Shrek impression and some of Seth's technical issues. You were all wonderful to
terrible acting.
Yes, exactly. Our terrible writing and acting and direction and all the other things. So remember, join tomorrow. Our live podcast will be Dr. Ruth Diaz talking about resilience, what it is and how you can improve your resilience. So join us for that. And other than that, I'm just going to play us out of here. But first, I'm going to spell your name for people listening on the audio-only version. Seth is S-E-T-H. Finkle is F as in Frank. I-N as in Nancy, K-L-E. Dr. Seth, how can people find you if they want to get in touch with you?
Easiest way to find me nowadays is LinkedIn. You can certainly do that. And I've had a couple of people reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'm more than happy to add you to my network and exchange information with you, so feel free.
Excellent. Find him on LinkedIn. He looks kind of like that, but more serious.
That's right.
That's right. So I'm going to play us out of here. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great Wednesday, and hopefully see you tomorrow for Resilience. Seth, thank you. Let's come up with another one.
Thank you. That sounds great.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks for watching. Delta CX is available for consulting and projects related to CX and UX strategy, leadership, training, problem finding, problem solving, and innovation. Learn more at deltacx.com.